thanks for putting a video on. It's nice to see everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just quickly around what we'll go over today is we'll start with some introductions. So who am I? Who's Jenny, if you don't know her? Lane, we'll go over the initiative and then kind of get into like what governance is, as well as some current thoughts around the foundation. So just real quick, actually, we'll go back. We'll do intros. We don't have slides for this, but so I'm Brittany. I work at Blockstack PBC, and I will be helping lead this project of helping create the Stacks Foundation. So as part of that initiative, though, we really want to work with the community in order to make this possible. So you can think of me as kind of a liaison between PBC and the community, but we really want this to be owned by an independent group that has all these different thoughts and things like that. So it's why we brought on Lane as an independent researcher to help us do that. I'll let him introduce himself as well, but it's just really great to be able to kick this off and be part of this whole project, somewhat as a participant more than just a leader. I'll turn it to Jenny to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. If you don't know me, hi. I feel like I should know all of you. Anyway, I'm also really excited about this project. I'll be working with Brittany and Lane to help facilitate a lot of the engagement around the community work that's going to go into this. As Brittany mentioned, it's going to take a lot of participation from our wider ecosystem to make this happen. A lot of the work has already been done. I've been seeing great conversations around governance, and we've had previous conversations like Juliet. I know that I've talked to you about this a lot. Things like, open source, where would that kind of activity take place? I'm excited for the foundation because it seems like a home for that kind of activity. So yeah, really looking forward to working with you for the next few months.
Great. So now I will kind of go over just a high level, like what we hope to accomplish with this. I think the goal is really to move towards this healthy ecosystem where no single party has full control of the network. So as part of moving Blockstack to be this decentralized system and ecosystem, it needs to be much broader than just a single entity like Blockstack PBC, which it is today. So with that, we're looking to involve the community, as we stated, and I think implementing and designing this governance is a really cool, really important project, which is why this kickoff call is the beginning of that. We hope to take that governance feedback and design and put it into a charter to form a new entity. So this will be a foundation. And with that foundation, this will help be a separate entity that can help uphold this charter and this governance rules. And then I think just some of the values that we really hope to embody in this process and in the charter is around transparency, accountability, and also the biasing towards taking action. So making sure that we get it right, but not sort of waiting forever to design a perfect system. Because I think we could spend a lot of time just trying to make it perfect and then maybe not get as much done. So trying to find the balance between those two things. So that's sort of a high level what we hope to accomplish. But I'd love to let Lane introduce himself and take over and talk about, sort of this whole process of governance and what we should be thinking about getting done as a group. So Lane, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Jenny. Can you guys hear me loud and clear? Okay, yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I guess we can go to the next slide. Cool. So before I say anything else, I want to start by just expressing how excited I am about this project for a number of reasons. I think Blockstack as a community, as an ecosystem, as a network, is in a very unique and very special position with respect to all things blockchain, and especially this new field of, for lack of a better term, kind of cryptoeconomic governance or governance of cryptoeconomic systems. I won't read every bullet point here, but, and I think we'll make these slides available later for people who want to kind of go back over everything later. But I think the most important things to note about my background, I'll kind of skip past the kind of really early stuff here. I'll just kind of jump to around 2017, which is when I first kind of entered the broader blockchain ecosystem. after business school, after working on a startup. So I joined the Ethereum ecosystem in 2017, primarily as a core developer. But I guess the short version of that story is what I found very early on was that as many technological challenges as there are in Ethereum, as in Blockstack, and of course, many of these other communities, there are a lot of very, very, very smart people addressing the technological challenges, right? So this, of course, is things like scaling, design of VMs and smart contracts and all this kind of stuff. They're very hard, but there's a lot of really smart engineers and software developers and cryptographers and researchers working on these problems. And so I have a high degree of confidence that they will get solved. And on the other hand, what I found at that time, and I think this is still true, is that the social side of blockchain and these cryptoeconomic networks is not nearly as well served. And I think that we don't have to kind of speculate too much as to why that's the case. I think, historically, the types of people who have been very hands-on with designing and building and launching these networks are have been historically a lot of very kind of engineering, technical minded folks who are really good with computers and not as good with people in general. Now, of course, that's in the process of changing. So it's a very roundabout way of saying that a lot of this foundational work has been done. The foundations have been laid. And I think that Blockstack is one of the very few communities that has put in this hard work for these past few years and is now in a place where you have a very healthy community, very functional system, great technology as well. And so, yeah, again, I couldn't be more excited about taking a lot of this theory of governance, which is something that I've been thinking and reading and writing and speaking a lot about for the past 2 years, and putting it into practice as part of the Blockstack ecosystem and alongside all of you people. So just expressing gratitude. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time to join the call today and for all the hard work that you've all done over these past couple of years already to get us to this place where we can have this conversation about governance. Thank you. I'm really genuinely quite honored and excited about this opportunity. Yeah, so I guess very briefly, just finishing up the last few bullet points on the previous slide, there's a number of cool initiatives in the broader blockchain ecosystem. So Koala, which stands for the Coalition for Automated Legal Applications, is one of them. There's another one called the Wharton Cryptoeconomic Governance Workshop. And again, we'll make these slides available so you can kind of click on those links. I know you can't click on them here in Zoom if you want to read more about them. I helped organize a governance workshop at DevCon, which is the large annual Ethereum developer conference. And so it's been really exciting to see in the Ethereum ecosystem that governance has been getting more attention. People are realizing how important it is. Okay, yeah, let's go to the next slide. So as I was reviewing the comments in both the, I was confused, Discord and Discourse. I want to get this right. In the Discourse forum post that Brittany posted about a week ago, as well as in the Discord channel that Jenny helped us set up, quite a few people jumped in and kind of said, well, this is exciting, but what is governance in the first place? What does it mean? And so I thought it would be helpful to take just a few brief minutes at the beginning of this conversation to attempt to define governance. We can go to the next slide. So the point I want to make here is that governance is very complex and very multifaceted. And if you ask 10 or 12 different people, you'll get many different answers. Again, I'm not going to read through all of these here. You can kind of skim them, right? So we have these high-level categories, things like decision-making, collective action. And I want to also credit the source here. So I mentioned a moment ago the Wharton Cryptoeconomic Governance Workshop. That was organized, is organized. It's an ongoing initiative by a gentleman named Kevin Werbach, who's a professor at the Wharton School of Business. And so he, as part of this workshop, one of the very first things we did is he polled all of the attendees, something like 20, 25 people, and asked them, what does governance mean to you? And we got all these crazy answers. So yeah, again, reading the headings here, power and authority, rules, change management. To me, governance is about allocating resources, working together as a community, trying to factor in the needs of as many different stakeholders as we can, and achieving consensus, right? Which is really a beautiful thing if you think about it, because blockchain itself is about achieving consensus on a technical level. And so in order to do that, we need to first kind of achieve consensus on a social level, which is to me what governance is about. So you can, if you think about the blockchain, like the Stacks blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain as sort of layer one, right? And you have applications on top of it at layer two. My nerdy way of thinking about this is that governance is layer 0, right? It's the thing that has to exist in order for us to be able to build a healthy layer 1. We can go to the next slide. And so in a nutshell, right, this is the most reductionist, kind of simplest way I can express this idea of governance. It's how we make decisions, but the together part is really important because you know, if it's just you deciding how to allocate your own time, your own money, that's not governance, right? That's a very straightforward thing to do. But the moment you have two or more people or organizations or parties with differing needs and differing interests, sort of sitting in the room together, you know, with some resources on the table in front of them, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's you know, infrastructure that needs to be built, that's governance, and that's hard. Let's go to the next slide. So what is crypto governance in particular, right? What makes governance of networks like Ethereum and Blockstack unique and difficult? And I think there were also some questions in the governance working group channel to this effect as well. One person asked, what are some of the key challenges we face in crypto governance? So I want to lead here by saying, actually, this community is already doing it, maybe without knowing it. I'm very new to the Blockstack ecosystem as a participant, but I've been observing the ecosystem for quite some time. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about this opportunity to work on this with all of you guys is the fact that I see a very active, very engaged community that cares very deeply about governance, really. I mean, we can call it other names, right? So I think a really great manifestation of this, a really great example of this is can't be evil. And that is, to be very clear, sort of a foundational principle, or call it a value, that has been agreed upon, right? So consensus has been reached within this community that this is something that we stand for. And if you think about, I mean, just to use one example here, the first line of the Declaration of Independence in the United States, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? And so I would argue that one of the truths or principles that the Blockstack ecosystem holds to be self-evident is the fact that we need a better set of tools and a better set of values to allow application developers to build applications in such a way that they can't be evil. So yeah, so it's something that you've been doing for quite some time, maybe without realizing it. What sort of things make it unique? I think this is a very big topic, but very briefly, it's the set of tools we have, right? It's the fact that we have tools like game theory and mechanism design, smart contracts, tokens, that allow us to build novel incentive mechanisms. You know, so whereas default world or off-chain governance involves people sitting in a room around tables, you know, with pieces of paper, with reputations at stake, right? It's not that we can't have those things or do those things. It's that we have a very powerful new set of tools, things like staking, DAOs, right? To borrow, you know, a very popular idea from the Ethereum world, that allow us to kind of align interests and stake things other than reputation. Another important question is, what exactly are we governing when we talk about governance? There's a slide on that next, so we'll put that on hold just for a second. Again, this question came up previously. What problems are we trying to solve? What challenges do we face? Big question, big topic. I'll go back to the resources point, right? I think that, and also back to the idea that Brittany shared at the very beginning of this presentation, right? We want to build an ecosystem where there isn't a single entity in control. That's of course what we mean by decentralization. And I think that that is a very hard problem. If you think about how the governance of existing entities and institutions, whether they're nation states or corporations work, they tend to be highly centralized. And so again, I think this is a unique aspect of crypto governance, that we're trying to build incentive mechanisms and systems that allow governance to be far more participatory and far more decentralized than anything that exists today. Another topic that comes up a lot in governance of these cryptoeconomic networks is this formal versus informal governance, on-chain versus off-chain governance. If you do a Google search for crypto governance and you read some of the amazing articles that have been posted by people like Fred Ehrsam and Vlad Zamfir and Vitalik Buterin on this topic, you'll come across these a lot. So yeah, very briefly, formal governance means that we have a formalized set of rules in place that state kind of what are our different groups of stakeholders and how do those stakeholders join governance, how do they participate, what are the kind of checks and balances among those different groups, whereas informal governance tends to be, well, as the name suggests, kind of a group of people who sort of know each other and trust each other, just sort of making decisions in an informal fashion, whether it's, sitting around a table or on a Zoom call, which is how things tend to happen in the blockchain world. On-chain, off-chain is another very important contentious topic in blockchain governance. And this has to do with whether we want things like voting, people sort of staking or spending tokens to vote, versus off-chain governance, which is sort of the old-fashioned form of governance, which is more just people chatting and reaching decisions at the social layer. And these are all topics that are very important, and we'll go into much greater depth about them in the coming days and weeks as part of the governance working group. So I do encourage you to get involved in that if this stuff is interesting. Yeah, in the interest of time, I don't want to go through all of these in great detail. Processes, mechanisms, stakeholder groups. These are all sort of basic vocabulary, right? So governance, we need to sort of factor in the needs of different stakeholders, and we want to put in place mechanisms. Brittany mentioned values a moment ago with respect to the values we want to instill in the foundation. And I think transparency and accountability are two very important values. I think if you have nothing else, but you have these, you could do a lot worse, right? They're a very good starting point. And constitution, I'll talk more about what constitution means in a moment, but the idea here is before you have anything else, you need to agree upon, again, reach consensus on things like mission. What is the purpose of Blockstack in the first place? Why are we all here, right? Why are we all taking time to be involved in this when we have many other places we could be, many other things we're doing? What is our vision for what this could look like in 5 years or 10 years time? What are the sort of values that we share? What are our foundational principles? And so I think, again, that's a core part for me of what this initiative is going to look like over the next few weeks. Yeah, and there's more articles, things I've written and other articles that other people have written that we'll share after this as well. Let's go to the next slide. Cool, all right, so this is a basic question, but it's an important one. It may not seem, how do I put this? Yeah, if you don't kind of stop to think about this, it's not super obvious exactly why this is hard to figure out, but let's go to the next slide. I'll just give you a glimpse of what I'm talking about. So the beautiful thing about these blockchain, cryptoeconomic ecosystems is that they're very multifaceted, and they have a lot of different kind of subgroups, right? Sort of overlapping sets of stakeholders. And if you were to kind of try to draw like the Venn diagram of the Blockstack ecosystem or the Ethereum ecosystem or any of these like thriving ecosystems, you'd find a lot of kind of funny shapes and overlaps and things like that. But as we're beginning to think about governance and we want to begin talking about things like what are our values, what are our principles, what are our goals, I think it's really, really helpful to start by asking this really basic question. And as I said a moment ago, it's non-obvious until we kind of drill down into it. And so there are actually quite a few different things that need governance. To be clear, all these things need governance, right? So there's sort of concrete entities like Blockstack PBC, like this new foundation we're talking about. There's very concrete resources like hours that we're all spending and funds and tokens and things like that that are being allocated. There's this fuzzy idea of the community. There's the core protocol itself, right, which is kind of the formal specification that drives the blockchain and the smart contracts running on it. There's various implementations, right? So in the case of Blockstack, there's only one at the moment, but one of the possible outcomes of governance may be that there are multiple client implementations, which has been the case in other projects like Zcash and Ethereum. There's the network itself. And so, to be clear, individual organizations and people operate their own nodes. And so even if we're kind of governing the protocol, we don't necessarily have control over what people are doing with their own hardware and software. There's the data layer itself, right? So this is a very contentious topic that has come up. Of course, I'm sure most people on this call are familiar with things that happened in the past, like the DAO attack and the subsequent hard fork in Ethereum, which kind of like reverted transactions and moved funds, right? So that's distinct from everything else. That's just a question of data and ownership of funds. And then there's the applications, right? Which again are separate. I think there's another slide here which highlights a few of these. So if we can go to that one. For the purposes of kind of this conversation and most of what we will be talking about in the governance working group, it's going to be the things that are highlighted here. These are kind of the most interesting and the hardest parts of governance, right? So, so PBC governance is kind of beyond the scope of this initiative, but by design, it's about decentralizing governance, creating a new foundation, looking at the resources we have and how they should be governed. I think by definition, we have to talk about governance of the protocol, right? Because the protocol is bigger than any one organization. It's bigger than PBC, for example, and maybe not questions about the blockchain itself. We can keep going. Yeah, so I'll read this, right? Governance is complex, it's subjective, it's multifaceted. There's no single form of good governance. And I put this up here just to reemphasize that, like, when we talk about governance, it's helpful to do it in more descriptive terms than normative terms, right? So instead of saying governance should be this or governance should be that, it's kind of useful to take a slightly kind of academic, empirical view and kind of look at what the options on the table are, and then kind of over time, look at, in parallel, what are the needs of this community and what is the right form of governance for this particular community, this particular ecosystem, this particular project. There are certain values in governance like transparency and accountability that are almost always good to have, but even then there's an asterisk, right? Like, it may be the case that some small group of friends has some small project that, is not ever intended to be some big, global ecosystem with millions of users. And so in that case, maybe those things are less important. So I just want to emphasize there's no single form of good governance, but it is our task together to figure out the best governance for Blockstack. Let's keep going. This is another important foundational idea that I want to just briefly highlight. One of the most exciting things about blockchain in general, and indeed the thing that kind of sucked me personally into the ecosystem and has kept me here, is that that blockchain can, and I think should, and I think will be used to govern a lot of things in the real world. And we're beginning to see this today, with some of the kind of DeFi, the decentralized finance initiatives that are happening in Ethereum, and some of the DAOs, those decentralized autonomous organizations. Blockchain and smart contracts and these incentives and this mechanism design, right? That's this toolbox that we can use to build better, fairer, more transparent, more open, more participatory, more just human institutions. That's a huge topic that I think is really worth exploring and having that conversation. However, it's not the focus of this initiative, right? So in this initiative, we're not talking about how we can govern things in the real world using Blockstack, using the Stacks blockchain, using applications built on it, not yet. Because in order to have that, we first have to figure out how to govern the blockchain itself and all those bullet points I highlighted before, the foundation, the resources, the protocol, et cetera. So we need to have that stable foundation. We need to figure out how we can govern the blockchain itself before we can use it to build more real world applications. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. And it's just good to remember our motivation, right? At the end of the day, if we want the world to care about what we're doing, if we want the world to care about Blockstack and the Stacks Foundation and all of this, we need to get our own house in order first. So we'll be talking about how to govern the blockchain. Let's keep going. So this initiative is going to play out over the next few weeks and months. And there's a timeline slide, which I think we'll see in a second. But again, it's helpful to kind of keep ourselves focused on where we're going and what the plan is here. What is the scope of this project? And so one of the main deliverables here is a governance proposal, right? This is going to be a single comprehensive document that covers most of the bullet points that I've laid out here. As the little note says, we may not decide to include all of them. We may decide to include a few other things, but this is kind of a high level idea of what that will include. And everyone here on this call and everyone who's watching this recording, these are the things that we can use your help with, right? Just to reemphasize and reiterate this point because it's so important. This is not an initiative that any one person or any one organization can or should do on their own. This is not something that PBC can handle on its own, which is why we're all here having this conversation. So please contribute your thoughts and your ideas and your questions. Again, this term constitution, I'm using it in quotes because it doesn't refer to a single document necessarily. It's kind of, when I use it this way, I mean this entire body of ideas, right? So what is the mission? What is our vision for this? What are the shared values we have? What are our goals? And what are the foundational principles we have as we embark upon designing this governance system? And so Can't Be Evil is a great starting point. That's one. what are the roles of the various entities? So the three most obvious ones here are Blockstack PBC, the new foundation, and the community. And there may be others in the future. And what are the kind of checks and balances among those different entities, and what is the kind of balance of power among them, right? I think one aspect of mature and healthy governance, not surprisingly, is that not all of the power rests with any single person or any single organization. Hopefully that's kind of self-evident by now. We have enough kind of human history to understand this basic principle. And so I think it'd be very helpful to lay out those different roles and those checks and balances among those roles. And then how should the foundation itself be governed? Is there, so what are the roles of the people behind it? How do we maintain and ensure transparency and accountability? What is the role of the community? Is the foundation accountable to the community in some sense, or maybe to stacks holders, the treasury management of the foundation? And at the same time, also the governance of other things. I'm kind of grouping a number of related ideas here under this heading of community, but the code base, right? So there's, again, a single code base right now, which the majority of the work on that is being done by PBC and by core developers employed by PBC, but there's now an SIP, a Stacks Improvement Proposals process, which, so we have this thing called EIPs, Ethereum Improvement Proposals, and Bitcoin has BIPs. This is a way to decentralize basically the governance of the protocol and the software. And so what should that look like? What can that look like? Of course, governance is about a lot more than just code and the technical side. There's also economic questions, ethical questions, legal questions, questions of things like conflict resolution. And so governance may not be able to address all of these things in the very beginning, but that's something to work towards. Knowledge base, this is the last bullet point here. This is an important one as well. In the name of transparency and accountability, it's my opinion that everything that involves community governance or foundation governance, right, because it's sort of, of and by and for the community, it should all go into an eternal public knowledge base, right? So any member of the community can go back and kind of see the notes from calls that happened and hopefully view the videos of those calls and see how the decision-making process happens. That's the only way that we can ensure transparency. And so the proposal should also include ideas for how to do that. Let's keep going. I think the timeline is the next one. Yes. Again, I won't read all the bullet points here. We have a pretty aggressive time frame where, we kind of kicked this off last week. Thank you all again for jumping on board at this very early stage. You can probably tell that we still have a lot of work to do to, we have a lot of work ahead of us over these next few weeks. And so again, I think speaking personally, as much time and energy as you folks and other folks in the community are willing and able to dedicate to this project, I certainly look forward to your help and assistance in all of this. Immediate next steps, there's going to be a survey asking some more specific structured questions. So please do participate in that. And also you can help design the survey as well. So we'll follow up about that inside the working group on Discord. We're going to have a draft of that proposal sometime in the next few weeks. There's also going to be a separate charter for the foundation itself. And then, kind of towards the end of this period, so looking out 2 to 3 months now, the foundation itself will be formed. And that's a really exciting thing. But again, we have a lot of work to do between now and then. Let's keep going. Okay, I think that's all I have. I know that was a lot. Thank you so much for listening to all of that. Brittany, Jenny, I'll hand it back to you guys and then we can open it up. I did take some notes from questions people already asked, and so we could kick off with a couple of those as well if you like, but let me start by handing it back to you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lane. That was very helpful. And thank you guys all. I think we have 20 folks on the call, so thank you so much. For Q&A, I think if you want, we can leverage the group chat. So if you have like a burning question and you want to like drop it in there, maybe we can start there. And I can always call on you to like sort of explain more about your question off mute if that works. So maybe in the meantime, Lane, if you want to kick off with a question or two, we can start there. And that way, if everyone wants to talk at once, at least we have sort of a governance for how to do that.
governance over the governance process. We have meta governance. Perfect. Yeah, so please, I encourage you, ask questions, go ahead and throw questions into chat, or I think you can click a button to raise your hand in Zoom. Maybe Brittany could keep an eye on those as well. There are no dumb questions. I just want to reiterate that. This is a learning process for all of us. I'm still learning. We're all still learning. So even if you have a super basic question, jump in with that. So I'm going to lead with a question here from, so I'm looking now at stuff that was shared in the Discord group. So a gentleman named Brad shared a question, which is kind of like, what are the different sets of stakeholders, right? And so he mentioned that we have stakeholders, we have app users, we have app developers, we have core developers, investors, exchanges, miners, nodes, infrastructure providers, businesses, service providers, ... One of the most important questions in governance is the stakeholder question. Like, where do we draw the lines? Who are our stakeholders? How do we identify them? How do we know their needs? There is no easy answer to this question, but I think this is something that we as a community need to decide as one of our foundational principles, right? There has to be a line somewhere. It's not as simple as saying all the human beings, you know, who exist on the planet today and will ever exist in the future are potential stakeholders. I mean, in some senses that is kind of true, because I think we are building a piece of infrastructure that, you know, in the same way that the internet is something which has touched the lives of billions of people, there's no question that kind of internet 2.0 in the form of this blockchain and this community has the potential to do that. Having said that, that's an impossible task, right? It is not possible for us to factor in the interests of like billions of people. It's just too daunting. So I think a good starting point is to define some of these core groups of stakeholders, whether it's, you know, 3 groups, 6 groups, 10 groups, whatever it is. And I think that the groups that Brad proposed here are a really excellent starting point, and do like a stakeholder mapping process. So this is something that we can do on a future working group call, identify some of these core stakeholders, these groups that are relatively well defined. What are their needs? What are their current access to resources and access to governance and things like that? I definitely think core developers, app developers, investors, exchanges, miners, like without a doubt, all of these are groups that should be included in that process.
Great. So we have a question in the chat around from Joshua around how would week 1 be started? So Joshua, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that, but.
Can we go back to that timeline slide?
Oops. There you go.
Right. So week 1 was last week, so it's kind of already started. But it was basically just the announcement that Brittany shared and the creation of that Discord group, which Jenny kindly set up for everyone. This is officially week 2, but you know, it's still kind of the first few days. So yeah, I think we have started. If Joshua wanted, was there another part of that question, or? The other part I would say is there's another slide here at the end, which is kind of next steps. So we'll share the concrete next steps in a second.
Awesome. I think Peter has a question around, are there some existing governance models you want to use as a basis? Although there are some new possibilities, I worry about using Blockstack as governance research project. So like, you know, are there best practices that already exist? So we don't have
Yeah, this is a great question. I definitely share Peter's concern. I would not like to call this a governance research project, right? So I said early on in this call that one of the things that excites me about this project is that it's an opportunity to take a lot of theory and a lot of those best practices, which we, as a broader kind of, again, blockchain, not specifically Blockstack, but broader blockchain ecosystem, are just coming around to. And so I think that there are groups of really intelligent, really focused, really motivated researchers. So these are the organizations like Koala and the Wharton CryptoGov initiative that I mentioned a moment ago. And to be very clear, right, those folks are not strictly software developers, right? Those are PhDs, people who have spent their entire careers researching topics such as governance, corporate governance, constitutional governance, jurisprudence, and kind of theory and practice of law, political philosophy, conflict resolution, philosophy, those topics, right? So those people exist and this body of knowledge exists. I'll throw out one name, which is on the top of my mind. That's Primavera de Filippi. I know a couple of folks have already begun compiling lists of resources, so videos and articles, and sharing them in the working group on Discord. So thank you to the folks who did that. And her name came up a couple times already. Primavera is a really fantastic, brilliant researcher who's been thinking about this stuff for a long time. So I think that this is not theory. I think this is practice. I think that the best practices do exist, and I think it's incumbent upon us as a community to, how do I put this? You know, it's kind of like when the Enlightenment happened. Maybe I'm getting a little bit too crazy here, you know, but looking historically, there was this period of time of kind of 50 years, 80 years in human history when like all these new ideas like liberalism were kind of bubbling up in coffee shops across Europe and things like that. And then, you know, it took time for those ideas to solidify into like actual practice of governance. But my personal feeling is that that's the stage that we're at right now in the blockchain community. And so we have these tools and we have this best practice and we have access to these amazing minds. I've maybe gone a little bit off the track. Existing governance models.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that maybe we talked about even before this meeting was, are there projects that are, you know, alive out there today, crypto projects that have done interesting things that maybe we could use as inspiration, as maybe some positive things that we could do, not just the things that go wrong, but actually the good things. And I think you'd mentioned maybe 2 projects that, that are worth looking into. Yeah,
so positive examples are Aragon. So there's an organization in, well, sort of in the Ethereum ecosystem, although they're in the process of launching their own blockchain. It's called Aragon. It is actually itself a governance project. And I think they've done some really important foundational work along similar lines, actually, to what we're doing right now. So they started as a single centralized group of people, and they made a very conscious decision over the course of the past 2 years to split that off so that they have not a foundation, but an association, but it's also a nonprofit, very similar model. And then they have multiple service providers who apply to that association for resources. So I think that's a great example, really important foundational work there. I think Zcash, the Zcash ecosystem, is another really fantastic positive example. Zcash started as a single for-profit company, not that dissimilar to Blockstack PBC. And again, over the course of the past 2 years, they created from scratch a nonprofit foundation and have been kind of transferring certain decision-making authorities and powers into the hands of that organization. And that appears to be going quite well. So I think that there are some positive models that we'll draw from and learn from.
Great. Philip had a question around, you know, say a suggestion that we'll probably need to have some physical meetings or working groups in order to discuss and reach consensus on what we're developing. So I know that we have this Discord channel, but maybe if you could expand, like, okay, how does that actually work? And I'm assuming that because we're all in different parts of the country, it likely will be remote meetings, but they will be in person in that way.
Yeah, so this is a good segue into, I wanted to respond to another question someone raised here. Ethan asked in Discord, what's the greatest challenge in implementing decentralized governance? And I didn't speak directly to this before, but I want to address it now as I answer this question. To me, the biggest challenge in decentralized governance is identity, right? It's the fact that on the blockchain, you are anonymous, or I guess technically pseudonymous, and one person can have many identities. You know, we sometimes refer to these as kind of sock puppets or sybils in the blockchain space. And that's a huge challenge for governance, because if we don't have a one-to-one mapping of like people and identities, then we can't have democracy. By definition, democracy is kind of one person, one vote. And I'm not saying democracy is perfect, but it's, you know, the famous Winston Churchill quote, it's kind of the best system out of all the others that have been tried. So that's the answer to that question from my perspective. The biggest challenge is kind of lack of democracy and lack of kind of robust notion of identity. And so I really strongly agree with Philip's point here. I think the only way to combat that is face-to-face meetings. And I think, Brittany, to the point you made a moment ago, like we're all obviously distributed, I'd say not just around the country, but probably around the whole world. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a balancing act. On the one hand, we want to respect people's privacy. And if people want to kind of contribute, you know, pseudonymously to the governance process, I'm personally okay with that. But I do think that facilitating some degree of face-to-face, whether it's digital or, you know, maybe at some point in person, maybe alongside one of the Blockstack summits, you know, we could actually have like an in-person governance gathering with a remote participation option for people who can't be there in person. It's essential, right? It's the only way that we can get over kind of pseudonymity, the challenges of that, and establish trust.
And yeah, just to comment on that, thank you to all of those who have joined the working groups. I am really like blown away by the kind of productivity and engagement you can reach remotely with other people. I know that with the proof of transfer working group, for example, we experimented with like sending gift cards for coffee, and everyone would show up with their coffee mug, and so that would kind of simulate the experience of an in-person meeting. But I totally agree that nothing can replace like the magic of working together in person. And we do have meetups around the world, really. So what I'm excited about is like, as we continue working on these problems together, there will just be an impetus to want to meet in person, because some questions are so urgent that it's just better to talk to each other about them in person. And I assume that, for those of you who have been involved in meetups, you can, use us as a resource to help organize those and have some of these more productive conversations in person, and live stream them, whatever you want. But I'm sure that'll be kind of an experiment as we go along.
Yeah, Jenny, thank you for making that point. That's something that we've been doing for a few years in Ethereum, and it's worked quite well. There are a lot of Ethereum events that happen all over the world. I've been to 5, maybe. Okay, I haven't been to any in Africa yet, unfortunately. There was something in Africa last year, but I missed it. So I've been to 5 continents as part of Ethereum. And it's been amazing to see these kind of decentralized, self-organizing initiatives pop up in all these places on the sidelines of all these conferences. So that's something that I'm sure will happen in this ecosystem as well. And I think it should be encouraged, right, in the name of decentralization and kind of community governance. I just want to make one quick additional note to that, which is I think it's essential that governance be participatory and accessible to everyone, or at least to as many stakeholders as possible. And I think there are stakeholders who, for various reasons, cannot or don't want to participate in events in person, and we need to make sure to facilitate those people as well. And so that's why I think it is important that those events, as much as possible, be live streamed, allow remote participation. We've done some of this in Ethereum as well, and it's gone really well. So we could talk more about how to do that later.
Awesome. So Joshua has a great question around, he said, if this is the case, correct me if I'm wrong, but if this is run by the community, which is assuming it's not handled by PBC, who would be initiating the survey, feedback, and how do we know we're heading in the right direction of governance? So I can take part of this. So this is why we brought on Lane to work as an independent researcher. So right now he's contracted from PBC, but the goal is that he can actually help facilitate this in the community as an independent party. So, I'm here as a resource to him, Jenny, everyone here at PBC, but he's really helping amplify the voices of the community. So if you have questions, you'll see him very active in the Discord channel and the forum. Those are great spaces that the community already exists. So he's just leveraging what already exists with PBC, and we'll be jumping on there. But I think the question about how do we know if we're heading in the right direction of governance, I will put on Lane.
That's kind of not fair, Brittany. You take the easy part and give me the hard part. Yeah, just to echo what Brittany said, I view my role in this, as Brittany said, I'm an independent entity here. I have no formal affiliation with PBC. I view myself as a liaison or as a conduit for the broader community. And so when I say that, what I mean is I'm at your service, you being everyone in this community, everyone in this ecosystem. Please do not feel shy. Please don't hesitate on any occasion to reach out to me, whether it's part of the group or whether it's directly on Discord or another channel. My role is kind of to steward the conversation just based upon experiences I've had in Ethereum and other ecosystems, try to get everyone on the same page, be a motivating force to kind of, making sure we're making progress on like survey and things like that. But so I agree with everything Brittany said. How do we know we're heading the right way? That is a really, really hard question. In fact, I'm going to turn it around, I think, and just ask all of you folks, what sort of milestones or metrics should we be setting for ourselves? This goes back to what I said earlier. I don't think there's a single right or perfect form of governance. I think it's on us. It's upon us. This burden is upon us to kind of figure out how we want to govern ourselves and what we want those metrics or KPIs to be, right? How do we want to track our progress towards that goal? I think that kind of the initial phase of this project is figuring out what we want to be and how we get there and how we track progress towards that goal. Just to share a couple of concrete ideas, I think one could be participation. I think we have a really amazing, engaged group of people who have been part of this project already, very engaged in the working group channel in Discord. So that's a very positive indicator to me. The more the merrier, right? To the extent that we have more people, we have more diversity, more voices. I think that that's a very important metric. What else? I guess maybe beginning to see that system of kind of checks and balances emerge. It'd be good to kind of see some of the power and authority and the kind of unilateral governance that PBC has been doing on everyone's behalf up to now, to begin to see that devolve a little bit, some aspects of it into the hands of the foundation, into the hands of the community. The SIP process is a great example of this. So those are just a couple of ideas of relatively concrete metrics we can use, but I'd love to hear everyone else's thoughts.
Yeah, folks, you're welcome to join, either comment in the chat, or if you want to come off mute, or if you want to think it over.
I have a very fundamental question right now. So in the first impression, it looks like the Stacks Foundation is going to be primary governing body of the entire Blockstack ecosystem, including PBC, the protocol community, and the resources it has. So since we have a special case here, Stacks being a regulated token, SEC token, would the Stacks Foundation would also have to follow the regulations which comes under US SEC, or there is some other model which you have in your mind? Or I assume this discussion must have been done in the Blockstack PBC. So if you can share any insights about that, it would be very be good for the community, so that we can add our inputs based on that.
Sure, so we'll take that from PBC. Yeah, so right now we are operating under the SEC framework that has a time limit in which we would need to renew. So we're looking at, how long that would look. Outside of US, the token is deemed a utility. So there's like a lot more flexibility in how the token can be used. Outside of the US, inside of the US, it's a little bit of a different story. So part of our roadmap is thinking about how do we get to a point where we don't need to be under that SEC regulation anymore. So that's definitely a strong consideration. There's no set timelines or set facts about that yet, but it is definitely something that will, I believe, will evolve in the future. So like how we will work before that happens, I think is something that's definitely top of mind. But yeah, that has been part of the consideration with these entities and how they will operate. So I know that's a vague answer, but that's all the information I can share right now.
Deepak, thank you for the question. You mentioned as part of your question, the foundation is going to be, I'm paraphrasing you here, but kind of like the primary governing entity. I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, right? I think that the goal here is decentralized governance. And so the entire kind of point of this initiative is that there's no single primary entity at the top. It's not a hierarchy, right? It's kind of more like, imagine like a group of people sitting in a circle, in chairs. So there's kind of different entities that have different roles and different voices. And so anyway, it's especially important not to think of the foundation as governing PBC, right? They're kind of separate entities and they're kind of peers. And going back to what I said earlier, one of my favorite things about blockchain governance is that we have blockchain nodes, we have software that kind of operate as peers in a peer-to-peer fashion, but kind of the social layer of governance should look a lot like that. So we're still kind of trying to figure out what that will look like.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. But actually, we have seen in past few years that very robust, theoretically good governance mechanism can also be relatively centralized, and it happens most of the time. So my main concerns were coming out from that, but I hope like with good intention, we can get to a stage where it is fairly decentralized so that acceptable to all the stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a super valid point. There's a reason that Blockstack and most other projects start with centralized governance, right? And that reason is efficiency. Like everything else, decentralization is wonderful and brings us a lot of really wonderful things. It allows us to factor in a lot more voices and needs of a lot more stakeholders. But reaching consensus in a decentralized way, again, both at the social as well as the technical layer, is a very slow process. It's an expensive process. It involves a lot of message passing and things like that. So I think it makes a lot of sense that governance starts centralized. And so again, the goal here is to kind of move towards decentralization, and it's not an easy thing to do.
Sure.
We have a question in the chat from Tarun about quadratic voting. I think that's so thank you for bringing that up. I think that it's a really exciting idea. So for folks who are not familiar, quadratic voting is an idea that's become a hot topic recently. There is a book called Radical Markets from Eric Posner and Glenn Weil, two professors, two researchers, and the Radical Markets set of ideas has so there's a community called Radical Exchange built around that, and there's been a lot of exchange of ideas between kind of the Ethereum community and that community, and so it's a blockchain agnostic community. But I'd highly encourage everyone in Blockstack to look into Radical Markets and look into Radical Exchange. It's a really fantastic community, and I've learned a lot from engaging with them. Anyway, one of the core ideas shared in this book and in this community is this idea of quadratic voting. And what quadratic voting means is instead of having a single person with a single vote, each person gets an allocation of votes. So let's say you get 100 votes per whatever, per year, per election cycle, something like that. If you want to, it's your choice to kind of choose how you allocate those votes in different subjects, right? So let's say that you care a great deal about education. It's called quadratic because if you cast a single vote, that counts as 1. If you cast 4 votes, that counts as 2, right? If you cast 9 votes, that counts as 3. So it's that math is quadratic. If you were to cast all 100 votes, all 100 of your points, allocate them to a single question, then that would count as 10 points, right? Because 10 times 10 is 100. And so it's a novel mechanism for allowing voters to express the strength of their preference, right? The problem with kind of one person, one vote is that it doesn't capture the strength of preference. And so as a result, the opinions of minorities tend to get lost or drowned out in the majority. You see this playing out in issues like gun rights in the United States, things like that. And so quadratic voting has been proposed as one way to address that. The short answer to your question, having shared all that background, is that it's a really exciting, important, powerful idea, but it requires this robust notion of identity, right? Because if you don't have this robust notion of identity, this mapping of one person to one identity on the blockchain, then collusion is too easy. It's very, very easy for me to team up with someone else and split my votes. And so if I cast 4 votes and someone else casts 4 votes, that counts as a lot more than if I cast all 8 votes. So I think it's an avenue that we should continue to explore and talk about, but it's not something we can rely solely upon in blockchain governance. I think it can be one kind of signal.
So I think we have a few more questions. I may say that we go over next steps and then we can leave the call open. That way, if people have to jump, like we have those kind of next steps. But I think we can stay over a few minutes for the other questions. I'll just skip to this next steps page, and maybe if you want to go through it, Lane.
Sure, yeah, so again, I know these links are not clickable here, but we'll post these slides. So there is a forum post, a thread really that has gotten a lot of amazing feedback already. So there's an initial announcement that Brittany shared last week. And there's a set of questions there around things like, what does legitimate governance look like to you? What role would you like the foundation to play? What kind of things should PBC continue to do? It's kind of like a survey light. So if you haven't had a chance to kind of comment on that and get, weigh in on that, like please do so there. I think the single most important action item is this governance working group channel on Discord. If you're not already there, I think probably everyone in this call, most of the people in this call probably already are, but if you're not, please do join the Discord. Please do join that channel. That's the main channel where we will be communicating everything that's going to happen as part of this process. So, we'll be sharing documents there and sharing links to calls and things there. So that's a very important one. We'll definitely do more working group calls. As I said a moment ago, they'll be announced in the Discord channel. There'll probably be Zoom calls. They'll probably be regular. It could be weekly, could be bi-weekly. We kind of have to get a sense for how much time and energy people have. We can discuss kind of the right time of day, time of week to do them. We can be flexible there. I think it's important that we keep a certain cadence and keep the dialogue going and keep the ideas flowing. And as we discussed earlier, we can do that asynchronously to some extent on Discord, but I think it'd be really wonderful to have a chance to get in sync. Rafa posted here, #ProofOfHuman. I think that these calls are a great way to kind of, we don't have deep fakes that are good enough, I think, to pass the Turing test and, fake videos and things, not yet anyway. So calls are a good way to kind of prove who we are. Survey, I think that's the next step for the community. That's something I'm going to be leading. So please contribute to that. I'll share ideas in a draft in the Discord channel. Additional resources. I'm thinking I'd really like to create a community-driven set of governance resources. It could be like a wiki, or maybe it'll be something on GitHub. Again, as I was reviewing the things that people have already shared in the working group channel, there's lists of YouTube videos, there's other articles. So I will set that up, and it'd be really wonderful if we could expand this resources thing into kind of like, have like a section like, for total beginners, if you want to learn about governance, click here, learn about blockchain governance here, learn about what Blockstack is doing here. I included a link here to Wharton Cryptoeconomic Governance Workshop. So there, that initiative is doing governance surveys across all the major blockchain communities, asking a very in-depth series of questions about how your governance works and what's working well, what's not working. So I think we can learn a lot from that project. I'm a member of that initiative, and so I'll kind of act as a liaison there. Ethereum.org is a community website launched out of the Ethereum community. It has no formal affiliation with Ethereum, but there's some governance related resources there, and there's another discussion forum there. And yeah, we'll share additional resources as we find them. So again, thank you so much for making time to join this call. And please get involved in whatever capacity you feel comfortable doing going forward. And yeah, I can stick around for a few more minutes.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. And yeah, like Lane said, please jump in the Discord and continue to ask questions or share resources there. Super helpful. You will see Lane a lot, so feel free to ping him or any of us, and we're happy to get you to the right place.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. And just as I mentioned earlier about the working groups model, it's very open. Participation is great, and feel free to obviously ping Lane or me if you think that resources are lacking. So yesterday, for example, I had a call with a friend to learn a little more about game theory, and I had some community members join me, and I just think that's the kind of thing that would really not just kickstart these efforts, but make us even more productive. So if you have crazy ideas like that, they're not crazy, let me know. We can make something like that happen.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think there were a few questions. I think Rafa and Tarun had some questions here, so we'll let Lane kind of continue to host those questions here. But thank you guys so much for joining us today. And thanks for all the nice notes in the chat.
Likewise, thank you everyone. If you have to drop now, I know we're at the top of the hour, feel free. I'll just do my best to kind of address some of the lingering questions we have here. Also, thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Jenny, for facilitating the call. You guys have been wonderful. Okay, so Tarun's question, do you see Blockstack differentiating global governance and local governance? Oh, that's an interesting question. Is the idea here that kind of the governance of the kind of top level overall blockchain should be distinct from kind of local governance? And I wonder what you mean by local in the context of a blockchain, right? Does that mean geographically local? Does that mean kind of just sub-communities, like, for example, maybe, app developers have one form of governance and token holders have another form of governance? Tarun, I'm not sure if you're still on the call. I can't easily see the list of participants, but if you are, feel free to kind of add more in the chat. I think yes is the answer, right? I think that we want to encourage different subgroups, however they want to organize themselves in a kind of self-sovereign fashion, to institute their own governance, right? I think it would be really wonderful to see different groups of stakeholders come together and yeah, just organize governance sub-initiatives. This could be like local communities, right? Like I'm based in New York City, and I'd love to kind of have like a, New York regional Blockstack governance initiative, and maybe someone else can kick one off for app developers, that kind of thing. And we can kind of talk about how those different local groups can communicate things kind of upwards to the foundation level, and how the foundation can make sure to factor in the needs of all those different subgroups. Tarun also asked about improvements to KYC process to deal with some identity robustness issues. I think that's a question I'm going to have to leave probably for PBC. I don't think that KYC, the Know Your Customer laws, are as relevant to kind of foundation or community governance as they are to kind of PBC and kind of this question of issuing tokens and things like that. So I'm going to leave that question. Maybe we can take that to Discourse or Discord or something. Tarun, I saw your note. No worries about being in a noisy place. I totally get that. Hopefully I answered your question. Rafa asked, currently $400,000 is given away to dApps on top of the Blockstack. Can this be extended to existing apps with users to incentivize them to transition the technology to the integrated stack of the blockchain? This, I think, falls under this broader category of questions around what app mining is going to look like in the future. As I think everyone is aware by now, you know, there's some discussion about what the future of app mining will look like in the Blockstack ecosystem. It was past tense kind of run by PBC. You know, that's something that I think we need to figure out as a community in collaboration with PBC. I can't speak obviously to kind of PBC's perspective on what app mining will look like going forward and kind of how much is going to be given away or how that will be governed. But I would love to see the foundation play a role in that. I think it's a relatively natural thing for the foundation to play a serious role in, because it's really a community initiative. So I don't have any concrete answers to this. I know it's a bit of a roundabout answer, but I would love to kick off a thread somewhere, maybe in the discourse forum, where we could talk about what that would look like and how it could be governed, and you know, who would make the call going forward about, you know, where the funds go and how much funds should be allocated, all that kind of stuff. In the initial, I'm just reading Rafa's comments here. Thank you for weighing in the initial stage. I love this strategy, giving away to developers. Can it be extended to already existing centralized apps? By centralized apps, are you referring to apps? I guess you're not referring to apps built on Blockstack. Is the idea that we want to take applications that are not built for Blockstack and kind of incentivize them to move on to the Blockstack? Okay, good. I understood your question. I think that's a cool idea. I think that's a really cool idea. I think as many amazing apps as there are in Blockstack, and there are hundreds of them now, it's been really amazing to kind of watch the app ecosystem mature and evolve very rapidly. There are, of course, far more mature applications that are not on Blockstack today. So could we offer some sort of a bounty or something for, you know, let's say, for example, an easy example is an app that requires you to log in. And right now there's a button that says log in with Facebook, log in with Google. How do we incentivize them to add a login with Blockstack button to that? I think that's a great idea. So I'd love to talk about what sort of a role the foundation could play in that. Another idea, allocating a bounty and elect team to build an app on top of Blockstack. Rafa, you're full of ideas. This is amazing stuff. I am going to end the call here, I think. Do we have any final questions? Tarun, what will be incentive for centralized system to switch? If I'm a centralized system, I will not like to decentralize. I think the answer to your question, Tarun, is values. I think we need to lead with values. I think money is great. I mean, certainly for small teams of developers, you know, Stacks tokens or kind of a few $1,000s can make a huge difference. I think that's obviously much less likely to be the case for a very large kind of well-funded company that has a centralized application, which is why I think the real secret power that we have as a community is that constitution that we talked about before, right? What are our shared values? What are our principles? If we can get on the same page about that, then I think we are in a really powerful place where we can kind of spread that message as a movement, as a social movement. And again, I think that this has already started in a big way. This is what Can't Be Evil is all about. And so I think governance has to be about those values and those principles and about sharing that message with the world. And it's just a platform for us to do that in a more effective way. All right, I'm gonna run. Thank you all so much. This has been so wonderful. Lovely to meet everyone. I wish you all a wonderful day, evening. I will see you on the Discord channel, and we'll do another call soon. So let me know when you'd like to do one. Thanks, everyone.